With the flow control valve closed, there would have been no airflow to maintain cabin pressure.
We've got a cabin altitude warning.
The discovery that the flow control valve was closed was a big deal for us. Now we were getting close to why the accident occurred.
Setting the valve correctly is a routine part of every takeoff.
Either the thing broke, or the crew took off without setting it.
Let's see what these turn up.
To check for mechanical failure, investigators need more pieces from the mechanism that opens and closes the valves. They step up search efforts at the crash site.
We bought and rented metal detectors, and people were out there on their hands and knees, sifting through dirt with screens to try to find these components.
Investigators fill crates with recovered parts.
Any more wreckage from the pressurization system?
But the valve mechanism is never recovered.
When we find a clue and we can't follow it all the way to the end, it gets very frustrating for investigators. We know we've got a piece of the evidence, but not all the evidence.
Play it from the top. I want to hear something she said before takeoff.
Benson turns to air traffic control recordings that captured all radio calls with the Learjet's crew.
Orlando Tower 47 Bravo Alpha requesting taxi.
He hopes the recordings can tell him when the Learjet began to decompress. The air used to pressurize the plane comes from the engines, so it can feel a bit hot. That's why some pilots wait until the last minute before opening the airflow valve.
V1.
Did they forget to do this?
Rotate.
Good morning, 47 Bravo Alpha. Climb and maintain flight level 390.
If they did forget to open the crucial valve at takeoff, they would have been affected by a lack of oxygen as soon as they climbed past 10,000 feet.
The progression of hypoxia symptoms is probably most pronounced in the mental arena, in our ability to think, our ability to make determinations. It's one of the reasons it's so critical.
Benson listens carefully to the voices. He wants to compare how the pilots sound on the ground with how they sound at higher altitudes where there's less oxygen.
It was important for us to try to figure out at what altitude, what point in the flight, really, something began to go wrong.
So far, so good. Play me something from later, after they climb past 10,000 feet.
Changes in their voices could reveal when the pressure failed.
You may get slurred speech as you do with intoxication. You may get slower speech as you do with intoxication.
Good morning, Jacksonville. This is 47 Bravo Alpha. Climbing to flight level 260.
She sounds the same to me. So everything's fine up to that last radio call.
Transmissions from the first officer were clear, so we knew at that altitude things were going fine.
Radios
Are set.
The timing tells Benson that the crew set the valve correctly at takeoff.
cabin air switch.
Normal.
Something happened between their last radio call here and when they lost radio contact here.
We had good transmissions from the flight crew, clear, without oxygen masks on, at an altitude of 28,000 feet. And 4 minutes later, as the aircraft was passing through 36,000 feet, air traffic control could not contact them. So that led us to believe that something pretty darned important happened between those two altitudes in that 4-minute window.
Something must have happened to close the cabin air valve, but it's impossible to say whether it was human error or mechanical failure.
Because of the chaotic nature of airplane accidents, you don't have a lot of clues sometimes. problems. But that doesn't mean that we stop investigating.
Cabin altitude warning.
There's another baffling mystery. The Learjet is equipped with emergency oxygen masks.
Masks on.
Masks on.
No matter what caused the loss of pressure, the oxygen masks should have given the crew enough air to breathe until they could land the plane.
If a crew happened to get an altitude warning, gosh, the first thing any flight crew should do would be to don an oxygen mask.
Can't breathe. Can you breathe?
Could the emergency oxygen system have somehow failed? Benson scours the Learjet's maintenance records.
Looks like everything was working fine.
He discovers that on several previous flights, the Learjet's crew used the masks without any problems.
We did determine that the oxygen was on board and the crew could have used it. So now the question became, why didn't they use supplemental oxygen?
Time to take a new approach. Set us to climb, please.
Investigators need to learn more about what happened on board the Learjet after the crew's last radio call. They hope a simulation of the flight will help.
There goes the cabin altitude warning. Start the clock.
You've got maybe 15 seconds to do something once you become in a environment that's almost eliminated with oxygen.
Emergency checklist. Got it.
Benson scans the same type of checklist binder used by the Learjet pilots. What he's about to discover could finally unravel the mystery and reveal why Payne Stewart's Learjet tumbled from the skies over South Dakota.
I think all of us sort of had in our heads the checklist will have, once you hear the altitude warning horn or any other indication of a decompression event, that you're going to put your oxygen mask on as the first and immediate action item.
The simulated loss of cabin pressure leads Benson to an astounding discovery. The first item on the emergency checklist is not don oxygen masks.
At 10,000 plus or minus 500 feet cabin altitude, control pressure to the outflow valve is trapped.
Some of the wording at first glance was quite confusing. And I imagine it would be very confusing if you were under a distress situation and trying to figure out exactly what the checklist meant.
This deactivates the automatic mode and stops cabin altitude from rising higher if the failure is in the automatic control system. I can't believe we still haven't put our oxygen masks on.
We were surprised because it implied pretty strongly that you need to troubleshoot a pressurization problem, and if you can't fix it, then you don your oxygen masks. And that's counterintuitive to us. That was backwards, in fact. The first step should have been don oxygen masks.
Okay, shut it down. I think I know what happened.
Investigators now have a theory about what went wrong on board the Learjet.
Everything is fine until about 24,000 feet. Then something causes the plane to lose pressure.
We've got a cabin altitude warning.
Emergency checklist.
They reach for their checklist and start to troubleshoot.
What does the checklist say?
At 10,000 plus or minus 500 feet, have an altitude control pressure to the outflow valve is trapped.
They picked up a checklist, read it, were confused by it, and the oxygen masks were sitting there unused.
Could it be the bleed air?
This deactivates the automatic mode and stops cabin altitude from rising higher if the failure is in the automatic control system.
What failure?
Hypoxia sets in with devastating speed. After 15 seconds, the crew would be confused and disoriented.
Read that again?
Okay,
A lot of it depends on how rapid the onset of hypoxia is, and a lot of it depends on the individual. But things that we tend to see fairly commonly, and probably the most important one, is the difficulty in thinking.
10,000. Control pressures.
Thought patterns becoming more confused and less deliberate. You actually start to lose consciousness. And if you don't get oxygen delivered back to you, eventually you're going to die from oxygen starvation.
But before they can solve the problem, the crew loses consciousness.
The Lear checklist, in a sense, a very real sense, could lead a crew astray.
Without those masks on, they wouldn't stand a chance.
Instead of a loud warning horn, maybe a statement from the airplane that says, "Put on your oxygen mask," would be more effective. Rather than having people who are having to try and figure out what the sound is, having to deal with the sound itself, and then having to try and figure out what